The night was cold and silent when Tom, a veteran truck driver, decided to take Route 66 to shorten his trip. The borrowed road was practically empty and time seemed to be on his side. But as the kilometers passed, things began to change. Abandoned gas stations, broken signs, and a strange feeling that I wasn't alone on that road. At every turn, the past seemed to get closer, and figures that did not correspond to time appeared in the shadows. Tom, see, this wasn't just a road, it was a trap. Welcome to the channel where every ride could be your last. Here, we tell the darkest and most disturbing stories of drivers and passengers who have faced the unexplainable on the roads. If you like feeling that chill down your spine, subscribe now. Hit the bell so you don't miss any chilling stories and share them with your brave friends. Get ready, because the next race could be yours. The Curse of Route 66. Tom Walker, a truck driver with over 30 years on the road, knew every shortcut, every highway like the back of his hand. He was a practical man, a survivor of long night drives, and he knew that driving at night had its advantages. There was less traffic, and time seemed to flow faster under the stars. That night, while making a long delivery that would take him from Illinois to Arizona, he decided to take the famous Route 66. Cut short, he thought. The borrowed road would be faster and quieter, or so it seemed. The night was dark, but light enough for him to see the asphalt in front of him, illuminated by the truck's headlights. The radio hummed softly, playing an old country song that kept her awake. He knew that Route 66 was almost a relic, a road that no longer saw as much traffic as it used to, but it was the best route to save a few hours. As I progressed, something began to feel wrong. There were 2 gas stations in the past that were completely abandoned. One of them still had the "Open 24 hours" sign, but the lights were out, the fuel pumps were rusty, and the place looked like it had been left in a hurry. Strange, thought Tom, but continuous direction. Further along, I passed an old roadside restaurant, the kind of place that used to attract tourists decades ago. The lights were also off, but the sign blinked sporadically, emitting an electric hum. Johnson Brothers Diner, since 1947, the worn panel read. Tom looked at the clock on the truck's dashboard. It was almost 2 in the morning, and the place looked like it hadn't been touched by anyone in years. An uncomfortable feeling began to creep up Tom's spine. He usually drove through isolated areas, but that night something was different. The silence was absolute, as if the road itself were dead. The radio chirped again, and the music stopped for a few seconds before coming back on, a little more distorted. Tom's eyes wandered to the rearview mirrors, but there was nothing behind him. No cars, no trucks, no living souls. Just him and the void. He shook his head, trying to shake off the discomfort, and continuously accelerating. After a few kilometers, he saw what looked like another gas station. But this time, something was different. The lights were on, and there was an old car parked near the pumps. A vehicle that looked like it came from the 1950s, shining in the light of the yellow lamps. Tom frowned. Anyone here? Finally, he decided to stop. Maybe it was just tiredness, but a cup of coffee and a few minutes of rest gives you a good idea. As he pulled the truck into the parking area, something caught his attention. The old car seemed perfectly preserved, but at the same time out of place in time. As if it were new, in 1955. Tom got out of the truck and walked to the pumps, looking around. The place was silent except for the sound of the wind passing through the ancient structures. He moved away from the convenience store, but when he reached the glass door, he saw that the inside was covered in dust, as if no one had entered it for decades. His heart started to beat faster. That nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong, back with a vengeance. He looked at the car again and suddenly saw a figure sitting in the driver's seat. It was a woman, dressed in period clothes, her hair perfectly done in a hairstyle that looked like something out of an old movie. She headed straight for him, her eyes locked on his for a moment too long. Tom stepped back, the chill creeping up his spine. When I looked again, the car was empty. He didn't wait any longer. He ran back to the truck, accelerating to get out of there. But as he drove down the road, he noticed that the clock on the dashboard was stopped. Route 66 wasn't just any old road. Tom began to understand that night, he had crossed into something much darker. Tom pressed the accelerator, the truck roaring down the empty road, but that feeling that something was terribly wrong didn't leave him. He looked again at the clock on the dashboard. The hands were frozen at 2:17 a.m., as if time had stopped since he left that post. And the worst part, the feeling of displacement kept growing. The road looked the same as before, but at the same time different. Something had changed. The darkness around was thicker, the streetlights were more spaced out, and the silence, that oppressive silence, seemed to increase with every mile. "Calm down, it's just tiredness," he muttered to himself. But even he no longer believed that. Something was happening on that road. Something out of the ordinary. As I continued, I passed another one of those old restaurants. The kind of place you'd expect to find tourists taking photos during the day. But this restaurant seemed frozen in time. The sign blinked dimly, Grand Restaurant, with letters that weren't painted in the 60s. In the parking lot, Tom saw something that made him slam on the brakes. Another old car. This one was different from the first, but it also felt out of place in time. A dark green sedan from the 70s, immaculate, without a single scratch. The last thing he expected was to see two perfectly preserved classic cars on the same night, on a road that seemed to have been forgotten by the world. Before you could decide whether to stop or not, something caught your attention outside the truck window. In the distance, on the side of the road, he saw a figure, a silhouette. Standing still, under the dim light of a streetlight. Tom opens his eyes, trying to focus. A figure looked familiar. Not because of the person themselves, but because of the way they were dressed. Old clothes, as if they came from another time. A long skirt, a round hat, and a coat that looked like something from the 50s. He turned his head to get a better look, but as soon as he did, the streetlight flickered and the figure disappeared. Tom's heart sped up. He was never one to be easily impressed, but now it was confirmed that something very strange was happening. He decided not to stop. The rising fear in his chest told him to move on, and fast. He sped up, trying to leave a sense of terror behind, but as he went, the road seemed to never end. It was as if he was trapped in a cycle. The radio, which until then had been just hissing, suddenly came back to life. But the music playing was strange. It was an old song, something from the 40s. A singer's soft voice echoed through the truck, as if coming from an old gramophone. He had never tuned into that station. Worse still, he didn't even know that radio stations still played such old songs. Tom frowned and tried to change the station, but the button wouldn't respond. The music continued to play, a soft, melancholic melody that only increased the feeling that he was no longer in the same place, or at the same time. The truck driver, already nervous, looked in the rearview mirror. His reflection was there, of course, but there was something strange. The bottom of the truck looked darker than usual, almost as if the cabin was shrouded in fog. Tom blinked a few times, trying to adjust his eyes, but nothing changed. Suddenly, a soft melody from the radio was interrupted by a voice. An announcer's voice, but unlike any he had ever heard. It was serious, distorted, as if coming from another time. "You're coming back, Tom. You're going back to where it all started." Tom froze. But what? He tried to change the radio again, but the voice continued. "Do you remember, Tom? The ones who came before you? The ones who never left that road?" Tom's heart was beating wildly now. He had never heard that voice, but the way she spoke his name, as if commenting something about him, was terrifying. He turned off the radio. The sound was cut off immediately. The silence returned, but the fear only grew. "Something you noticed." Something was around him. Further ahead, he saw what appeared to be a sign on the road. Tom strained his vision, and as he got closer, he saw what was written. "Welcome to Route 66. EST 1926. The sign looked new, but the strange thing was that he had passed this point before. "How can I be going back to the beginning?" With no other option, he continues driving, but the road increasingly seems like a trap. Time around him was distorted, and the figures he saw in the distance, always at the edge of his vision, made him doubt his own reality. The only thing he knew for sure was that I needed to get out of there. But the more he drove, the more that road seemed to have no end. Tom sped down the road, but fear had already set in deeply. He felt like he was somehow returning to the same place. As if the road was playing with him. The radio remained off, but the echo of that sinister voice that called him by name still resonated in his mind. Those who never left that road. He tried not to think about it, but the silence around him only made things worse. The road, which had previously seemed long and deserted, now seemed narrower, as if it were closing in around him. Streetlights flickered erratically, creating elongated shadows that moved in unsettling ways. After a few kilometers, Tom saw something ahead. A city. He sighed, relieved. Maybe you'll find some help there, or at least someone to talk to. As he approached, he noticed that the streets were strangely empty. There were no cars, no people, just the deserted city. The facades of the buildings left frozen in time, with old store signs and brands he hadn't seen in decades. Thompson General Store, since 1952, was written on one of the signs. But the store was closed, and the windows were covered in dust. A bar across the street, Miller's Bar and Grill, appeared to have been abandoned, but the neon light was still flickering dimly. Tom parked the truck near a rusty gas pump and got out. The air was thick, and the wind, although light, carried a musty, dusty smell. He looked around, looking for any sign of life, but everything seemed frozen in another time. The clock on the truck's dashboard still showed 2:17, as if time hadn't advanced since he entered the damn road. As he began to walk down the deserted street, Tom felt the presence of someone, or something, watching him. His instinct told him to go back to the truck, but something was urging him to keep going. With every step he took, the silence became more suffocating. There were no birds, no sound of wind, just that oppressive silence. He arrived in front of a small diner with dusty glass windows. Looking inside, he saw that the tables were still set, as if someone was about to sit down for a meal that never came. But as he focused his gaze, he saw something that made him shudder. There was a figure sitting at one of the tables. Tom froze. It was a woman, with her hair done in a 50s style, like those pin-ups he saw in old magazines. She was motionless, her back to him, but something about her posture seemed off. His shoulders were stiff, and his neck felt unnatural. Tom took a step back, ready to run back to the truck, when the woman slowly turned her head in his direction. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes had no shine whatsoever. She stared at him for a moment that seemed like an eternity, and then her mouth opened, not making a sound. It was like I was trying to scream, but no sound it went out. Tom took 2 steps back, his heart hammering in his chest. He knew he shouldn't have stopped in town. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Turning around, he ran back to the truck, jumping inside and locking the doors. The city seemed even more deserted, but now he could feel it. Something was watching him. Stepping on the accelerator, the truck roars, and he walks down the road again, trying to leave that ghost town behind. But as I went further, the road began to change again. The surrounding environment seemed to distort, the lights on the road disappearing one by one. Tom looked in the rearview mirror and saw that darkness was literally swallowing the road behind him. He sped up, his heart racing, but he felt the darkness getting closer, as if it wanted to consume him. The radio, which had been turned off until then, screeched again. But this time, it wasn't music. It was the same deep voice as before. "You can't escape, Tom. Route 66 keeps the lost." He banged his hand on the radio, but the voice continued, echoing through the truck. "You're driving through lost decades. Where do you think you're going?" Tom didn't know what to do. He couldn't stop, but the road ahead seemed to lead nowhere. It was as if he was trapped in an eternal cycle of despair and confusion. Suddenly, in the distance, he again saw the sign marking the beginning of Route 66. The same one he had seen before. It was as if he had come full circle, but never left his place. He looked at his watch again. It still read 2:17. Time doesn't move. Tom was getting desperate. There was no way out. He was stuck on the road, passing through in that weather, and more he felt like he was being taken where all the other lost drivers before him had gone. As I drove, ghostly figures began to appear on the sides of the road. Walkers, cyclists, drivers of vintage cars. They all watched him silently, their hazy forms appearing and disappearing in the darkness. The road was no longer just a path. It was a place where time had no meaning, where the past and present blended together in distorted ways. And Tom knew, deep in his heart, that there was no escaping the curse of Route 66. Tom drove with his mind in chaos. Every meter he traveled on Route 66 seemed to drag him deeper into an endless nightmare. The ghostly figures he saw along the road, the blank, expressionless faces, were those of people clearly out of step with their time. The past, the present, the future, everything was distorted, and he was stuck somewhere between these broken realities. The road, which once seemed like a quick fix to shorten the trip, now became its biggest curse. Every mile was a deeper journey into the unknown. He looked at the clock again, but of course, the hands were still stopped. 2:17 a.m., frozen in an hour that didn't advance, as if time were trapped along with it. His breathing was heavy, and he began to feel claustrophobia set in. The fear that he might never get out of there again. The radio crackled again, and this time, a voice that came out was different. It was a soft, feminine voice, conveyed with sadness. "You've seen the road, Tom. Now you need to understand what it is." He opens his eyes, trying to maintain control. What do you mean?" Who's there? The voice continues, ignoring your question. This road is a prison. A trap for those who dare defy time. Many sought to escape, but they all ended up here. And you, Tom, are destined to be a part of it. Tom's heart skipped a beat. This is crazy. I didn't do anything. I just wanted a shortcut. He agreed, hitting the steering wheel hard. The voice sighed, almost as if in regret. You entered where you shouldn't have. Now the road demands your soul, as it did that of everyone who came before you. Every figure you saw, every one of them was a trucker like you. A traveler. They all discovered who that I could cut corners, ignore the rules of time, and now, they are all trapped here, just as you will soon be. Tom looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the same ghosts, but this time, they were closer. More defined. He discovered some of them. Men in 70s trucker hats, women in vintage clothes, all staring blankly at their truck. It was as if they were waiting for him. Tom pressed the accelerator, desperate to get away from the sight, but the road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. It was as if he was driving into a void where there was no way out. Suddenly, he saw a light ahead. A faint glow, but a light nonetheless. He clung to this small hope and sped towards her. As you get closer, you discover that it was another gas station. Unlike the others, this one was intact, clean, almost inviting. It's now, he muttered to himself. Maybe this is my chance to get out of here. He stopped the truck near the entrance and got out. Everything was silent, but unlike the other stops, there was a sense of calm, almost a normalcy that he hadn't felt in hours. The convenience store was bright, the shelves were stocked, and behind the counter was a young woman, smiling, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Tom entered slowly, hesitantly. The young woman looked at him, still smiling, and said, "Good evening, truck driver. Are you lost?" He hesitated before answering, still trying to convince himself that this was real. "I think so. This road, something is wrong with it." The woman nodded, as if she had already said. "Ah, yes. Route 66. She likes to play with travelers. Many come here thinking it's just another road, but it has its secrets." His voice was soft, but there was something unsettling about his tranquility. "Secrets?" Tom repeated, trying to maintain control. "Yes," she said, with a look that seemed to pierce through him. "This road isn't what it used to be. Times have changed, but it hasn't. And it holds those who try to race against time. You've seen it, haven't you?" Tom advanced progressively, feeling the weight of his words. "I need to get out of here." The woman sighed, a sad smile forming on her lips. "Not many available. But maybe, if you follow the right instructions, you might have a chance." He looked at her desperately. "What instructions?" She pointed to a map of Route 66 on the wall behind her. An old map from decades past. "There's a point on the road. A place where time collapses. If you get there, you might find a way out. But it might also be the end." Tom swallowed. "And where is this place?" The woman pointed to a spot on the map, an isolated stretch of road where there were no cities or landmarks visible. "You'll know when you get there." Tom felt helpless, but he knew it was his only chance. He quickly thanked her, took the map and returned to the truck. When he looked back, the woman was still there, smiling, as if she knew something he didn't. Getting into the truck, he looked at his watch once again. Still 2:17. Nothing had changed. He knew time was against him, but he moved forward, now with a new destiny. The road ahead seemed darker, more dangerous. The ghostly glow of the headlights illuminated the asphalt, but the fear that it was all just an illusion consumed him. Tom knew this could be his last chance to escape the curse of Route 66. But as he drove, a question echoed in his mind. What if the exit point was just another trap? Did you like this story? Do you have something incredible to share? If you or someone you know has had a hair-raising experience in traffic, whether as a driver or passenger, send your story. Who knows, it might appear in our next video. Send your report in the comments or by email, and let's explore the mysteries of the road together.